Alright, so this is Street Fighter 2, released in 1995 for the original Nintendo Game Boy. Playing this on the Super Game Boy adapter gives you these custom borders that change per fight, which I thought was a rather nice touch. Unfortunately, this adds some brief loading times as a result. However, there is an additional touch to playing this on the Super Game Boy. You can actually play the Versus mode with a buddy on the same console, which is a rarity for Super Game Boy, which normally doesn't support multiplayer games unless you're using the updated version that came later on and only overseas. But back to the actual game itself. Now, it should be noted that even though the name of the game is Street Fighter 2 and features 9 of the 12 World Warriors from the original versions, and even the cover art resembles that of the original Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo, the core gameplay and graphics is based on that of Super Street Fighter 2. As such, you have all the enhancements and additions of that later version, such as Ryu's Red Fireball, Ken's Flaming Dragon Punch, Chun-Li's Kyoken Fireball, and the updated portraits. There's a couple of modes of play: your standard arcade mode where you pick a fighter and go through all 9 fighters to get your character's ending, assuming you're playing on skill level 3 and up. There's also your Token Versus mode, which makes use of a game link and another human player. And as an added bonus, there's also a survival mode for you to test your skills. Control took a bit of a hit for obvious reasons, seeing that as you're attempting to recreate a game that uses 6 buttons onto a Game Boy unit with only 2. But contrary to what preconceptions might color, Street Fighter 2 isn't a lost cause as a result. The end result is this: to perform a light attack, you tap a button; to perform a strong attack, you pressed the button. It's similar to how Control worked in Fighting Street on TurboGrafx CD, but unlike that game, Control actually works the way it's supposed to, with little to no lag. As such, pulling off special moves is a breeze, whether it be your fireball type moves or your charge based moves. Now, just about the only major sticking point with Street Fighter 2 on the Game Boy, and something that could potentially make or break a game depending on your point of view, is the frame rate or lack thereof. Animation is very choppy, almost to a frightening degree. Now, here's the thing: the game isn't sluggish. It runs at a fairly decent pace, just a tad slower than the original Street Fighter 2 would run, but it's still widely playable. You can execute moves without a hitch, no problem. But when looking at the game, it does become a bit of an eyesore, almost as if you're running a computer game with high-end system requirements on a computer with lesser specs. And looking at the game running, you'd think it'd be the worst playing version of the game, but it really isn't. Control's great, collision's fairly spot on, little to no lag when it comes to executing special moves. It plays great, but all of it is marred by the choppy frame rate. And it's a bit of a shame because the visuals here are fantastic, almost literally a near pixel perfect downgrade to 8-bit monochrome, and yet still strikingly familiar. The fighters are instantly recognizable and maintain their unique appearances as well as their statures. The various stages are incredibly detailed despite being void of people. Naturally, the intermissions, character select screen, and ending sequences are simplified, but that's probably due to their efforts focused on the in-game aspects such as characters and battle arenas, and it's effort well spent because this looks great, if only it wasn't ruined by the choppy frame rate. Sound-wise, well, they did the best they could with what they had to work with, and it sounds pretty good all things considered. Obviously, there's no way they could fit all the voice bites in there, you know, the Hadoukens and stuff like that, but the music's pretty good by Game Boy standards, all of them fair recreations of those classic themes, including that one theme that apparently goes with everything because people are stupid. Sound effects are less impressive, but they did recreate the bell tolls and pause sound, for the most part at least. Overall, Street Fighter 2 on Game Boy is a surprisingly decent and entirely playable conversion of the perennial arcade fighting classic that's only marred by the lowly frame rate that causes the game to look much worse than it really is. Even on a 2-button setup, the game plays and controls great, looks good graphically, sounds great, the shifting borders when played on a Super Game Boy was a nice touch, and it's a generally decent conversion job in general. It's just the choppy animation that ruins what is otherwise a fine effort on the part of Capcom. All in all, if you could get past the lowly frame rate and want a half-decent version of Street Fighter 2 on a Game Boy, you'll have something of a good time with this.